Of course not.
Becky, we haven't met.
Oh, I'm sorry, Becky, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Can you slide down a little bit? Okay, oh, I just finished playing.
That's okay. Why don't I slide, I'll put it on this end.
You can slide over.
David's there. Oh, David's there. Oh, you sitting up here?
Yeah, but I'll sit right here. I'm fine. Yeah. No, that's exactly where I wanted to be. Yeah, thank you. Josh, do you have any experience with this? Good afternoon. I'm Peter Consterly. I'm the gallery director of the Schelfhaudt Gallery here. Welcome to the first panel discussion that I've held in the gallery here, but also a great panel discussion for this reality of abstraction show. We'll begin with introductions here. To my left is Ann Sherwood Pundig, and next to her is David Rich, and next to him is Cecilia Whitticle Doe. Is that close enough? Kat Belko, Vincent Brillo, and Becky Yarston. So, welcome all, and I hope this is going to be a lively discussion. I've typed out some just kind of general questions about what the show is about, and maybe to steer the discussion into the idea of abstraction in contemporary art today. We also have a mic here, or we can just play past the mic as well, so I'm not going to be talking very much here, I hope. But the first question that I've comes to mind is, how much do you identify with the abstract expressionists? And maybe we'll either just go down the line at first and then open it up to more discussion.
Sure. I had the opportunity to review the Abstract Expressionist show that's in London now, which was an opportunity for me to really think about, revisit what this important kind of period in American history was for me. And just, it struck me that, it's considered the first legitimate American innovation in the visual arts, abstract expressionism, and it felt timeless. The resonance of the innovation of the material use and the scale, in particular, Clifford Still's work, I could identify with it and felt that it was still relevant.
How much do I identify with the abstract expressionists? I'd say about 29%. When I was in high school and I first got serious about painting, I lived in Chicago, and the Art Institute there had a big retrospective, I think it was about 1968, of de Kooning. So the struggle that went into the work, the changeability of it, the funkiness, there was all kinds of qualities about it that really made an impact on me. So some of those painters were some of my first loves. in a way when it came to painting. On the other hand, there's a lot of sort of historical baggage from the abstract expressionists that I don't particularly feel part of, nor do I want to be part of it. And some of that is just sort of guilt by association, having to do with attitudes about things being universal. I don't exactly share that. I came of age in a little bit more of a skeptical kind of time, but I think the improvisational qualities of their work continues to make an impact on me. I guess leave it at that, but just to say that maybe it is, by the time I hit art school, 1970, there had already been about 3 generations or so of people doing kind of bad versions of abstract expressionism. And I think that's one of the reasons that people always are trying to question a little bit their relationship to historical movements and make sure that in some ways they're doing something, putting something together in a way that resonates in the present time. But being a painter, I would say there's more than one way to be of our time, because painting itself is already considered somewhat old-fashioned, and yet for me it's still very charged and relevant.
I went to school in Buffalo for my undergrad, and I frequented the Albright Knox Art Gallery across the street from the campus, and there was a room of Clifford Still paintings there, which I guess is still there now. And that was my first experience with his work, and I felt dwarfed by it pretty much. I loved it, and I had a love-hate relationship with it, I think. And then I was introduced to Joe Mitchell's work that I really loved. And I think that what David was saying about the differences between the abstract expressionists, I think it's very important that you have someone who works with maybe some kind of a drawing, like de Kooning, for instance, did a lot of drawing in his abstract expressionist work with the paint, and as did Pollock. And then you have someone like Joan Mitchell, who was not, for me, even in her black paintings, she didn't really go to the same places that the other Avex artists went to. She went to in fact she was criticized, I think, for her lyricism in her work. It was lyrical, even the black paintings have somewhat something there in them. It's a place that she was after. And that's why I always admired in her work. And then there's Louise Fishman, who I think is a fabulous, wonderful Avex, the next generation artist, but also affiliated with that generation. And what I like about Louise Fishman is that she, it's paint with paint, and not so much of the drawing that you might see in a de Kooning, or it's that paint. She's also after a place, a place that you can settle into and you can kind of swim in her paintings. I also like the artist, if I can remember her name, Jackie Soccaccio, who is more current, a younger painter than Louise Fishman. But she, you can kind of swim in her spaces too, that she makes, and she deals quite often with the middle of the picture plane, which is kind of a dangerous place, and she brings you right in there with her. It's kind of, for me, another form of abstract expressionism, and it's maybe more related to Joe Mitchell than others.
When I went to college in the late 90s, while my teachers weren't abstract expressionists themselves, I'd say that the ideas of abstract expressionism sort of permeated the way that they taught. And I didn't really understand that until many years later, when I reflected on this sort of specific context in which I learned to paint and tried to shed some of my prejudices, actually. I think there were good things about that, or things I took from that kind of early influence of abstract expressionist ideas, and then things I was happy to move away from. On the positive side, I've always loved the idea that a painting can be a world in itself, that a painting can come out of action, that it's a kind of a personal journey of discovery, and you don't know where you're going to end when you begin. That's been a foundational idea in my studio. On the other hand, I think I felt very hindered by just the kind of bravado associated with the practice of painting, that you had to kind of be really tough and work all the time and be in the studio from 9 to 5 every single day in order to make any discoveries. That hasn't matched my life, and I've been happy to find alternatives. That said, the first kind of 20th century painter that I loved was de Kooning. There was a wonderful retrospective in New York in 96 or 97, and I saw that with one of my closest friends, and I remember kind of just shocked in the middle of the show, thinking, this man was alive, that someone else lived. And I think in the gesture, that's a big part of what comes when you experience abstract expressionist work, is that this, that sense, visceral sense of another life and encounter with that. And that's still quite important to me.
Hi, my name is Vincent. I have a very short answer. I do like the abstract expressionists. I don't know how much I identify with them. I never really thought about it like that, but they seem to paint from emotion and put motion into their paintings, and that's what I like to do. I paint a lot of time from emotion, and so, like I said, there's a short answer, and thank you very much.
Thanks. I don't know how much I relate to abstract expressionists now. I mean, when I first started looking at painting and thinking about paintings, I mean, these were the paintings that I loved, and the paintings that I just, that sense, like Kat was just saying, the sense of the person there, like, with these paintings, you feel the artist, you see the mess, you see just the incredible amount of materials, and new stuff was happening. It just was very exciting looking at these paintings. But, like everything, you look at it, you process it, and then kind of filter it out however it's going to come out. And for me, it started, scale was a big thing. It did feel like this. There was so much sort of machismo tied up in these, like, with all these, the guys doing these huge paintings. And I don't know, that felt, that was something I had to kind of consider and process and think about. And then I also started feeling like some of them were, like they were almost taking themselves too seriously. And I felt like, well, I like more, I like kind of humor and personal touch. I don't know, just more kind of intimate detail versus like these big grand, like I'm taking over the world, this kind of feeling. But I went to school I studied at New York Studio School, which is down on 8th Street. And that's the part of the city where all, these guys were hanging out at Cedar Tavern, and it was there's so much kind of romance surrounded with the abstract expressionists that's very appealing, and just, I think it was such a particular time that I don't think could be recreated now, but as for my own painting, I feel like I've sort of, it's kind of the opposite, small, intimate, personal.
Yeah. And I think part of their reputation, or what they're trying to get at, is something like really eternal, and the idea of universality that I don't see in a lot of the work here. And I find that a very interesting difference between abstract expressionism and this contemporary work now. Becky, or anyone who has the mic, do you want to ask the next question? Who are your influences?
Okay, one of my influences is El Greco, which might seem unusual since I like painting abstract, but his work is tinged with, I'm not quite sure how to put it, not quite abstraction, but if you look at his paintings, they're figurative, obviously, but they go beyond that. I can't really explain it, but I think he's just a wonderful, wonderful. I'd almost call him a modernist painter. And I like his colors too, a lot of purples and blacks. So he's one of my influences. Another one is Hans Hofmann. I like Hans Hofmann quite a bit. I was in a gallery, not a gallery. Yeah, I guess I was in a gallery in New York, and I was walking around, blah, 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 wandering around. I went into a back room. On the floors, there was just this Hoffman painting just leaning up against the wall. I said, geez, I could just pick it up and walk right out with it. I never would do it, but boy, was I tempted. It was beautiful. And I think the greatest exhibit I ever saw was in the Museum of Modern Art. I don't know when it was. I'm trying to figure out. Maybe around the year 2000. A little bit later, it was Jackson Pollock, and it was my first real intimate views of his work, and to me it was just absolutely stunning. I think there's one, it's called Blue Poles. It's got to be like 35 feet across and 12 feet high, and it's just, oh man, I talk about large painting. But it didn't, because of the way it was painted, it didn't seem so like incredibly huge. It just seemed like a great painting. And I liked him a lot. And I like a lot of the Renaissance painters and sculptors also quite a bit. So I guess a lot of those guys are my influences. And I love music, and music is, I think, involved in my work a lot too. I get some of the motion from the music.
I mean, where do you even begin with people that influence you, you know? There's so many, but I obviously am a huge fan of Noskowski. He's one of my favorites, and I adore Alice Neal. For that, again, it's that same kind of the materials, the sense of the artist working, the incredible emotion she could get into the paintings. I love Amy Solman's work, Guston, of course, the middle abstract ones, and then the late work, which, you know, the late Gustons were such a, talking about abstract expressionism, such a just kind of breath of fresh air, you know, seeing this, like, after all of that work, then seeing this, like, just intense, open, like, anxiety, just this, like, all this stuff in the work was, I mean, I love those paintings. I'm a huge Matisse fan. That weird Matisse turtle painting is one of my favorites. And there's a Courbet painting that I have kind of made a lot of work around. The Burial at Renan, or Funeral, Burial, right? Is a painting for some reason that's always kind of in the back of my mind. I'm sure I'll think of a million more.
I find that my tastes change all the time, and so I've been in different places over the years, but right now I've been looking at a lot of contemporary work, and I think there's a lot of great abstract painting happening right now, which is exciting. And so people, just recent shows, I've been excited about artists who are working right now. Judy Ledgerwood is a painter who works with pattern, and she had a show just a couple months ago. It's so good. I hadn't discovered her until I had already started working with patterns, but then I felt like, oh, maybe I should stop. But her work is wonderful. She is based in Chicago. Gary Stefan is another person I find interesting. He works with kind of a lot of geometry. It's a really interesting series where he was actually working with symbol, but very open way. And then someone else, a young woman named Stephanie McMahon, who's I think I just recently had a show in Boston, and I think she's quite young, but I tried my hardest to get there to see it, but from what I could tell, the work is, I don't know, really exciting. I find, for me, social media has like completely changed my life in terms of looking at other work, because it's so easy to find artists that you would like to learn more about, which is great.
Yeah, I think I have a love-hate relationship with social media, but as well as liquid stills. But I think that it has opened things up in a good way in many ways, to be able to kind of reach out and see what's going on now, and then hopefully physically make it there, right, to see it. But early on, my influences were Charles Birchfield. I just loved the way that Birchfield could go to the darkness of watercolor. I mean, the feeling of that. He was able to find a place in watercolor where it wasn't so light and cheerful, and yet there was this kind of spiritual hope that was going on in his work. But it was through this medium that he really transformed for me when I looked at his watercolors, in particular the watercolors. And then George O'Keeffe has always been a great inspiration to me, and Nancy Graves, an artist who was doing her later work in the 80s, where she was making sculptures and she was taking pots and different things that she would find in Chinatown, and she would cast them in bronze and in aluminum and have them pieced together to make these architectural organic forms in sculpture, and then use these really bright polychrome colors on them. It was kind of a pop, and it was a little Charles Birchfield to me, and a little surreal also. It was like all these things brought in together. So I think I've always been kind of influenced by people who can who use different mediums and also use different forms of styles in their work to achieve their vision or their place that they're trying to get to. A place that comes to mind all the time for me, because I'm always after that in my work. If I find that a painting is made up of little gorgeous little moments, but it doesn't provide a place in the painting, then I need to revisit it. So I kind of have gotten, that's what I gravitate towards in other artists. Also, there's a painting at the Brooklyn Museum by Degas. It's a quite large painting, and it's he did a painting of a ballet, and I can't recall the name of the painting right now, but it's a horse and a ballerina, and they're at the edge of the water, and it's an unfinished painting, or they believe it's unfinished. So it's kind of got a ghost-like quality to it. And what interested me is that he made this painting, he put them in a natural environment, although it was a painting from a ballet on a stage, and it was, and he brought it into a natural environment and still kept it as the ballet. And I thought that was a very kind of beautiful way of interpreting what he felt from the experience. He brought the experience in there and brought it into a compositional form.
You know, I'm really enjoying the fact that everybody's references don't necessarily make work that look like our work, and that's pretty intriguing to me. And I would say that my influences are similarly diverse or broad, not necessarily work that looked like what I'm trying to do, but work that made a big impact on me. So one of them was Elizabeth Murray, because of the sort of playful, but somehow also a sense of struggle in her work, that the energy of that really made an impact on me. And it's also like, almost like abstract painting bumping up against real life in goofy ways. And that just really resonated with me. I think that for that same reason, I also, like a couple of other people have said, Philip Guston was a real touchstone. Even though his late work is a very specific thing that doesn't look like what we're trying to do, somehow just the sheer insistence on bringing the work back in touch in some way with lived experience is so powerful that we maybe have to find our own ways to do that, but he was a real touchstone for that. One or two other names that I heard already that also hit a nerve with me are Amy Sillman. I've just really enjoyed the concentrated, playful, but somehow pared down quality of her work. Thomas Noskowski also has made a big impact on me because often I'm seeing paintings of his and they don't necessarily look that much like each other. And I feel that he somehow has been really tenacious about making himself available to what that particular painting needs and going to different places as needed in his painting adventures. And so there's a certain concentrated quality that tie them together, even though they each have pretty different ways of, they appear different, and they're modest in scale, but he opened up some important kind of psychological space for painting that still means a great deal to me.
I agree. It's really interesting to listen to everybody's. It's just this wonderful kind of pool of references throughout our history. And as I was kind of comparing what I had thought about beforehand after listening to everybody, I think starting with, we've already discussed the abstract expressionists, that pulling from, in particular, the idea of gesture and body leading to performance, dance, that kind of thing has always been an influence for me. It's like a concurrent interest along with painting. So, early in terms of strictly painting influences, I always go back to Manet for a lot of reasons. The paint handling, in particular, and just the magic of his paint. But I think the sense of modernism that he brought to work, the juxtaposition that we talked about in terms of like the Degas painting you described, was actually maybe taking something that wouldn't have, like putting two realities together. And I think he was pushing this sense of what is the narrative in a painting, what is it that representation does, as opposed to photography or just the tradition, the long tradition in Western painting of depicting a story. He began to shift that and play with that. And I think his interest in political messages and social, the idea of the Industrial Revolution coming, these things that were real as opposed to maybe allegorical from more religious content. So for some reason I was drawn to him. Many other painters come to mind, Matisse, Joan Mitchell, many of the ones you've discussed, but I found the work that I'm doing now obviously it's bringing together the essence of my interest in performance and dance and movement and gesture that comes out of painting, but bringing that to bear through selection of materials, certain color in the vocabulary, with bringing space, not using space as a window, which is a kind of core tenet of the painted experience, which is great, but having it come out into the space in a sense, making, us the subject of the painting. So, I feel a real, I couldn't love the tradition of painting more. It's like who I am and how I think. But at the same time, I think the way aspects of the other art forms, music, literature, philosophy, and theater and dance, that sort of thing, can share the sphere of painting.
I just want to say that
Sure.
thank you. This idea of bringing the narrative to another place, right, and bringing it out of religious, back when there were patrons, right, and the subject was there. But Marc Chagall came to mind because Marc Chagall was a Russian artist who was Jewish, and he was part of the very strict Jewish tradition, and he would take people and float them in the sky, right? And so just by merely taking a figure or taking animals or whatever he used and putting them into the sky, putting them into the clouds, messing with that, right? With your idea of where things belong. And suddenly there's another element, it opens up the world to it's an abstraction, right? But it's a figurative abstraction. And I think that's very related to what you were talking about. Yeah. And also related to the Degas painting, right? Although Chagall pushed it much more, and he was also dealing with Cubism, and he was dealing with the forms and the styles of the time, but in his way, he was, it had everything to do with his background, of course, and where he was coming from.
Yeah, there's a really great little sketch of Chagall who did a figure and combined architecture. And it was I always think of his painting as a kind of walking dreams, that you're just kind of walking into this imaginary place and you don't want to leave. It's just such a beautiful blues and great palette to get lost in. I'm going to skip down. I did mention some of the painters that are working today as well, Terry Winters, Bill Jensen, and Joanne Greenbaum. And Joanne Greenbaum has been around probably for about 10 years or so, but I think she's a very interesting abstract painter because she uses mixed media, ballpoint pens, and then she's kind of grappling with the idea of unfinished painting versus finished painting. And of course, abstract expressionists would sometimes leave paintings unfinished in order for the viewer to finish the painting with themselves. And so I feel like that's a kind of a tenet in abstract expressionists as well. But I did also want to just skip down and so do you feel the viewer should be able to know what your painting is about?
Feel responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I just I thought about this in relation to I just saw 2 movies about aliens. One was the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I saw on the plane recently, and then we saw Arrival last night, which is very similar. And they're also about language and communication. So this idea of intention, should the viewer know what the painting is about? So do you intend the viewer to know, what is it that you intend to convey? It's kind of a tenet of language and communication. And I think that I love the idea of 2 different life forms trying to communicate, because I almost feel like as a painter, you live in your own world. What you're trying to express is really your subjective reality, and you're trying to convey it to someone, your audience, so multiple different, who have their own senses of reality. And so can you cross that how is it that we do? And we do. I mean, we succeed. I think our works do that. So without answering specifically, this painting for me is about X and Y, it's this sense of, especially within the realm of abstraction, but I think in any painting, whether it's narrative or allegorical or figurative or any particular style, is that, what is it that, can you convey this sense, this core sense of, your intention? So I'm kind of not answering the question, but that's what I like about this question.
I teach a class in my college, sort of a visual culture class, and about how to look at work and how work works in our world, how painting behaves or how it contributes to our culture. And we read Kant at one point, which is kind of frustrating for everybody, but notoriously frustrating, but really interesting ideas about the kind of knowledge that art brings into the world, that this is maybe not a knowledge that can be, that's about language, that it's not an idea in a way that you can say that's exactly what that means, but still it's a kind of knowledge. And I love that so much about visual forms and painting in particular, that it is something new that we, as a painter, I don't really know what my work is about. I mean, at least I think as an abstract painter, I don't, it's very fuzzy to me if I were to try to turn that into language, but I think the kind of this Kantian visual knowledge can be very clear. I also think about, there's a great Susan Sontag piece about, called Against Interpretation. It was written, I think, in the 70s, and she talks about how sometimes talking about work, asking work to have content always, you can end up missing the point of the work. And in the end of the piece, she calls for an erotics of art rather than a hermeneutics of art. So, the idea that art, its very presence can move on us and give us some kind of meaning that's physical, embodied, and so I'm interested in that. It's a long answer to this question, but I guess at a point, I think that's really what I hope my work communicates.
Yeah, I think that I might pass this to somebody else. I think Louise Bourgeois said that to make art is to gain self-knowledge. Right? And at first when I heard that, I thought, no, I don't think I agree with that. It's too much maybe like navel-gazing, But now I've kind of mulled it around in my head, and I think that self-knowledge is different than learn, and this is related in that it's not painting is not the same as our alphabet of language, right? It's not the same alphabet. It's not the same kind of structure. It's a visual thing, right? And in that sense, I think that this idea of self-knowledge, as opposed to learned knowledge, to me, that's kind of where it goes for me with visual knowledge, if you will. And I think so. I think a little differently about it now than I had. And
Yeah, I like the idea that the viewer has to get a sense of what the thing is about. Possibly they get that sense after they've been engaged with the work for a while. I'm not sure that it's supposed to be super easy necessarily, because I don't really think in literal ways. So I'm not trying to tell the viewer exactly what to think. But on the other hand, I'm trying to make a work that's non-literal, but it's still very specific. So to my mind, when it's unresolved, it bugs me. I almost feel like the painting is working on me, and I have to stay engaged with it until it's resolved. And when it's resolved, it becomes this kind of like chunky container of compressed trains of thought into one piece. And I like the idea that viewers can spend a little time with that and begin to get a sense of what it's about. So one or two examples are that my wife and I have adjoining studios, and she has presses and stuff like that that make it hard to move in her space. And my work is on the walls, and my mixing tables are in the corners. So I have a big open space, so we used to have some events in my space. And one event was some music friends did a concert. Another event was a poet friend did a reading. And I had people come up to me after a poetry reading or something in my studio and said, you know, I came in here at first and thought, oh, murky paintings. And after I was in the room for about half an hour, I felt like this little chunky shape of blue sort of floated off the painting and nudged me in the shoulder. And the space seemed to open up a little bit. And it was like, that wasn't exactly something I intended, but I really found that to be intriguing. Another guy came into the studio, not for an art reason, but just because in the days before cell phones, we had a phone, and this guy on the loading dock that was just a truck, you know, doing a delivery, needed to call somebody and asked if he could come up. So he comes up and uses the phone for a minute, and then afterwards he says, so I'm looking at these paintings, and it seems solid, but then like everything sort of switches, but then it's solid again. You pretty well got it. So I like the idea that in some ways abstract painting doesn't have to try to be for everybody, but on the other hand, it is for anybody. In other words, if you're just willing to engage with the work, hopefully there's something there that, you know, at least becomes provocative in some way. And I guess the last point I would make would be that if someone wildly misinterpreted the work, it would bug me. So that says to me that we are going for some kind of communicative thing, even if it's hard to say literally exactly what that is.
I think about this a lot, actually, because my paintings are all very specific and about kind of specific memories or things. And people ask me this question all the time, like, because no one would ever get my stories. You know, they're so specific and so like no one's ever going to get them, and that's fine with me. I title the work to kind of give a way in. Like, I think people need a starting place sometimes with abstract work. So I title them, but not everyone looks at the titles. I think the most important thing for me, I don't like having to read a statement in order to kind of get something. Like, I want to be visually engaged with the painting, and I want it to make me think. And I think at the end of the day, if someone wanting to spend time to look at it and think about it is kind of the best we can hope for. I mean, that's kind of the goal, you know?
I never studied painting. I studied literature in college, and I remember one class we were discussing a poem, a modern poet. I don't know, obviously I don't remember who it was. And we went on for the entire class. Well, this means that, and that means this, and that means this, and he's saying this about that, and this about that. And then finally at the end of class, I guess somebody was exasperated and asked, and he said to the professor, not in a mean way, but curious, he goes, do you really think that the poet meant all that? And I was very intrigued by that question, and I couldn't wait to hear his answer. If he was smart, he would have said, well, I'll answer it next week in our next class. But what he said was, he said, no, I really don't think so. And I think that holds true to a lot of paintings. I particularly would like to look at a painting, just say those paintings over there that are on that wall, and I particularly would like to have the painter explain to me, and this is just my feeling, my curiosity, what he meant. If he knew what he meant, and if he didn't know what he meant, that would be fine too. I wouldn't say, oh, that doesn't count. But I'm just curious, because I can't see anything in there that I can recognize. And I would love to have the painter explain to me what he meant. And that's how I feel for almost all the paintings that I see, or the abstract paintings that I see. I particularly want to know. If you know, I would like to know what you're trying to get at, or maybe it was just your mood, you might have been mad at your dog or whatever. So I would, and then on the other, I would like people to know what my paintings are about, my ones that are more figurative. The ones that are more abstract, I don't see how they could know what they're about, because I have no idea what they're about. So they might look at it and say, well, this reminds me of this, or this reminds me of that. Or one time a person said, and he had a very contentious relationship with his son, and he said, that reminds me of my relationship with my son. Obviously, I know I wasn't painting for that, but so on the abstract side, I have no idea what they mean, except they're emotional to me. And then someone else looks and they say, that reminds me, that's great, wonderful. Then the figurative ones, I would like for somebody to, look and say, I kind of understand that. And I'll just close with one thing. I had a very good friend of mine over at my house, and there's one of my paintings over there. It's called Star Voyager. I changed the name. I called it Travel, and then I said, well, because of what he said. So anyway, he was saying, I said, I'm an abstract painter, but I'm a little bit of a realist too. So he said, okay, and he pointed at Star Voyager, and he says, what does that mean? I said, what do you think it means? He goes, I have no idea what it means. So I explained to him what I thought it means, and he said, not one person in 50 billion could ever have figured that out. So who knows? That's one of the paintings with the tile. I would have liked someone to look at it and kind of get a little bit of it. Maybe yes, maybe no.
Yeah, I think that rings true for a lot of work and a lot of artists, that I certainly don't ever want to find myself in the position of explaining one of my paintings. I had students also, and I was showing a student how to draw something, and she said, oh, I wish I could get inside your head. And I looked at her and I said, no, you don't.
You never get out, right?
Believe me, trust me, you really don't. But I think the more I work, the more I feel that it is the artist's situation to find something in their work, and it is the viewer's situation to seek and to search. And that's how I like to leave it. That's my
I have another thing I want to add. The other kind of issue related to this about whether or not if you are going to explain your work, so with my paintings, I run into this thing too, where I don't necessarily want to give up, like the very specific ones, I don't necessarily want to give up this specific memory or whatever, because then you're spelling it out for somebody, and then it sort of closes it down. Like, oh, so you mean that's supposed to be this, or, and even for myself when I'm working, if I start recognizing something about what the painting is ultimately about, it almost ruins it, because I'm not interested in illustrating something. And so if I get an idea in my head about, oh, these two colors have to do with this, thing from when I was a kid, then it kind of stops me, because then I'm thinking of it as this direct thing. So I never know. And I had one person end up with one of my paintings, which he loved, but then the title was Gettysburg or something, and then, he looked at it and he's like, I wish I didn't know the title, because now I look at it and I see a cannon every time, and I don't want it to be a cannon. I want it to be whatever however he related to it. So I don't know what the right thing is. Like some people really need and want the specifics. But I don't know, I think it maybe kind of ruins it on some level too, if you give up too much.
Peter, can I connect this to a later question?
You sure can.
To jumping ahead
Yeah.
to what is the task of painting for society? Because I feel like this sort of gets into that territory. The origins of abstraction, many early abstractionists were interested in theosophy, which is this kind of arcane spiritual set of ideas, about how humanity is evolving, and painters like Mondrian, Kandinsky, Hilda Hoffman, who I totally love, and I know that there was a show of her work recently, I didn't see it, which is
They
such a
look
bummer.
great. They look great.
But the amazing thing about these paintings is no one saw them ever until after she died, right?
Well, there was a stipulation in her will that they couldn't be shown 20 years after her death.
Crazy. But just the idea that abstract painting is this seeking, that artists are seeking new things through the work, and that viewers can hopefully find. And so I'm just going to go out there and say that I do believe that what we are doing as abstract painters is trying to kind of raise consciousness, in a very fuzzy way. And I totally know that people could say that's ridiculous with all the things that are happening in the world, that what's happening on the canvas could possibly make a change. And I don't understand how it does, but I think it's a really important job. And Kandinsky even talks about how artists are sort of the ones on every level of society who raise everybody up, to kind of higher levels of consciousness and evolution. And I think that's true. I think.
Well, isn't that kind of with the, back to the late Gustins again, isn't that kind of how the late Gustins came about? Because he's making these beautiful abstract paintings, and there's all this stuff happening in the world that was really messed up. So then, it's almost like I can't say enough painting this way. I gotta just put all my frustration and anger in this direct, I don't want to say obvious, because that's not the right word, but just this direct, very clear way, which is, hopefully I don't know, I hope we don't all have to start doing that now, but
Lots of people.
I think that we can get caught up also in like Gustin was in a certain time and making these abstract expressionists, these abstract paintings, and then he kind of found himself too, right, outside of that. And it could have been related to outside forces, and I don't know, but it's. I think that it speaks to also to just how you need to find yourself as an artist in relation to the times you're living in, somehow, right? Somehow that has to happen, and I think that is that's the important thing that artists do, is that we kind of hold this ideal, or I don't know, ideal is probably not the right word, but we hold up something to society as being maybe sometimes against it, sometimes with it, sometimes, but that it is coming from it could be coming from out of art history, but it's also coming from that particular artist at that time, and it's like poetry, it's close, most closely related. I think painting is most closely related to poetry in that way, because that's what poets do.
When I looked at a couple of Becky's paintings, I had the feeling that I don't know exactly what her experiences were that she may have been thinking about when she made the painting, but somehow looking at the painting causes me to go down deeper into my own experience to remember something. So the way painting communicates may not be a direct and literal thing. It's a different kind of thing. The artist goes down into their own experience, the viewer's coming at it from somewhere else, but maybe the work touches some kind of nerve that causes them to go down into their own experience. So I like the open-endedness of abstraction, and that you don't want to shut it down too prematurely and say that this means this or that means that, because so many people are lazy. They stop looking. They just think, oh, this means that, okay, I'm done. And no, I don't think that's compelling enough of a reason to want to give your life to painting and deal with all the financial uncertainty. And I mean, it's a total pain in the ass, but it's a total inspirational thing too. And I think that question that, I mean, Peter called the show Reality of Abstraction, which I really like, because I think some people go into abstraction as a way to get away from reality or some kind of escape. And I love thinking about abstraction as a way that somehow puts us deeper, grounds us in terms of our own experience and our bodies and architectural spaces or dance-like spaces, and that somehow abstraction is so concrete and specific that it actually helps us maybe more than literal words do as far as being in the world in a particular way. The other thing is that I think sometimes we have to remember that for the viewer, there's so many things in this world that demand our attention. And if I'm viewing painting, if I'm going to look at work and I feel like there isn't something in the work that compels me to try to read the work carefully, I tend to lose interest. And yet, when I look at work, even work that's way outside of my personal preferences, when there's something really charged about it, and I feel like I'm being compelled to try to read the work more carefully, that's what I need. And that's what I'm going for as a painter too. And I feel like there's something really important, because we can look at anything, you know, the thermostat in the corner of the room, you know, a piece of dust on the floor. Anything you look at can be interesting in some way. But then the question becomes, what exactly is it we're coming up with? So we have almost like a double function. We sort of go down into experience and we're playing and exploring and all that. And yet we're also still somehow deciding what to bring back. And there's some kind of communicative thing that I think has to be there if the work is going to stay with us over time.
Let's see, Kat, you mentioned touch, right, earlier. This question of the, you know, unique quality of painting as a vehicle within, you know, what role does painting have? I think the fact that it's handmade and it represents an individual's point of view. I mean, you know, Kant's critique of judgment was reading that was one of the more meaningful things I've done in the last 20 years. And the idea that the subjective voice is valued. It's something that, you know, as a parent, you know that you need to convey that to your child, and as a society, we frequently see, you know, a sense of not understanding the importance of each individual subjective perspective and voice, and I think that painting gets at that in a really efficient way, because you have to make, you know, one person makes it with their hands, and so then that's what you understand first and foremost, the body-like aspect of the painting, even, you know, bones and skin and the sensations that you read are all, you know, unique to painting. So I think that's its power, and even if it, so I'll just leave it there.
In a world barraged by images, what images are sacred, and what do we want to take with? And Kat, did you want to say something real quick?
Oh, unless you want.
Well,
I just, there's so many interesting ideas coming up, and Richard Tuttle came to give a talk at my grad school once, and he said, it was the most bizarre talk. He came into the room and he said, had some studio visits, and I've determined that none of you love yourselves enough to be true artists, and also none of you have any idea how powerful art is. You have no idea. And, you know, and everybody was sort of like, just didn't know what to make of that and was vaguely insulted, you know, but I feel like that just those themes of, you know, sort of self-knowledge and the consciousness raising qualities that painting has have, you know, resonant, and it seems like something that a lot of us are touching on now.
And I'll just have a final question here, and then maybe we'll open it up to the audience if you have any particular, questions for the panel. The last question is, how do you choose your palette? And of course, well,
I wrote down, in preparing for this, I just put one word, I put mood. And, it could, sometimes it's what I have on hand, but it really, I can't actually pick up a color unless unless it resonates for me at that moment. And that will, it changes from moment to moment, but that's exactly, I won't pick it up if it's not something, and so what determines that is a huge question, which I think we can probably answer in different ways, but that's how I do it.
Well, I guess for me, it's kind of, my roots in painting, I kind of trace a lot of things back to when I was working from observation. So, like for example, if I look at this man's face, his skin tone is relatively light, but his face is a little bit in the shadow. And compared to that wall behind him, that light is blasting forth. So whatever I think the color is on his face, I have to adjust that to get to my sensation of how it behaves next to that other thing. Like relational seeing, like everything is a little bit contingent on everything else. So I don't so much think in terms of any fixed particular symbolism or anything for colors. But once I get going on a painting, I feel like the painting does start to take on its own particular sense of light. And a couple of the students did mention to me at the opening that a lot of my work has that kind of evening light, that sort of dusky kind of light where the painting almost absorbs light more than reflects it. And maybe that's a little bit too predictable in this series of works here, but still I'll take it because time of day. I always feel like dusk is a time of day when things resonate in a certain way that to me is very, maybe it's a little bit scary, but it's also deeply comforting too in some way.
I don't have too much of a formula really for it. I put colors on my palette as I need them. So I don't start off with colors all around. I just kind of grab them and look for them and add them as I need them while I'm painting. But just a couple of things about palette, just from my personal experience. It took me, for the longest time, I didn't really understand what warm and cool colors were. When I was in undergrad and I was in a textile class, I took painting and textiles, and the professor used my work as an example, and she said, do you see how she used all the cool colors over here and all the warm colors over here? And I looked at it and I thought, oh, is that what warm and cool are? But I always thought of what were thought of as cool colors as warm and hot. And I always thought as what people thought of as, I twisted them around in my head, in my imagination. That was how I felt about the color. And so I don't know why that is, but it took me a while to kind of understand. Since then I had to teach, and so I had to teach what warm and cool colors were. But I've never felt about them in that way. So, and the other thing that's just about palette is that I think that whether you're painting abstract, landscape, figurative, whatever you're doing, in some cases, if you're doing a more old master kind of style of glazing, let's say, to bring up the flesh tones, you really do have to have some kind of very more formal way of outlining your palette. But if you're doing another kind of painting, you don't necessarily have to follow those rules, right? So I think that other than just personal experience with color. I think for many artists, it's also the kind of painting that you're doing that then dictates, you know, how you're going to go about your palette.
So I worked as a decorative painter and kind of a trompe-l'oeil painter for many years after college, and so I was always working with interiors and mixing huge amounts of paint, and I learned that I absolutely love seeing like a bucket of wet paint. Like it's just so delicious to me. Like, and so I mix kind of big jars of colors and intuitively, but I've always had this. I think one of the things I love about I think there's something magical about painting, I guess, and I find that I have these bizarre coincidences happen to me around colors when I start using them. For example, some of these paintings, the ones over there, are painted on this particular gray ground, and it was a color, I mean, it was just sort of accidentally, it ended up being the color that my youngest son's room was painted. Like, I didn't even know that. I mixed it carefully in the studio, and then kind of went into his room, and I was like, no way, that's the color of his room, that I just mixed. And then also, I was teaching that semester, and it happened to be the color of the kitchen of one of my students, but like the color is so specific, and it's like I could have laid the chips on top of each color, and you wouldn't have seen the difference. So I think it's to me, it's I guess a deeply intuitive and unconscious thing, and I suppose I'm definitely a Jungian, so I believe in these coincidences and these synchronicities, that there's something kind of powerful at work, and to me that the palette is a really big part of that.
Painting makes you psychic.
Absolutely.
I kind of go along with Anne. It's just my mood, how I feel.
Color is really important for me, and I think the colors almost choose me for the painting, or like the way they end up. They kind of become their own destiny, I guess. That sounds weird, but sometimes I'll start with two colors. I'll want to combine, like I like using these kind of like, I like kind of attacking colors that I can't stand. Like I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna take this like really sweet pink, and then I want to see what happens if I put it next to this like earthy color. So sometimes when I'm starting, I'll just start with something like that. Like, okay, I'm gonna use this green and this pink, and then, and then it goes on from there. And then I can't, then I can't stand a color, and then I have to paint over it or whatever, and then it evolves. But the colors end up often determining what it's about, or it's the clue to me about what the painting is about. For whenever I paint, if there's a particular red and turquoise combination that I realized at one point were the stripes on this bathing suit, hand-me-down bathing suit I had when I was a kid. And it was such a specific memory. And the colors will always be that for me. And I don't know what it was with this bathing suit. But I love the power that color has to just take you instantly to a place. But in terms of palette, I keep kind of a traditional arrangement on the palette, but then, 3/4 of them are all kind of dried up, and I just keep putting stuff on top and grab stuff as I need it, or I'll just stare at the tubes and a color will jump out, and then I just go from there.
I have a little afterthought. David, I think you reminded me of, I don't know if anyone else took the Albers color theory training class or whatever, where you learn about the relational aspect of color, and that was, I use that all the time in thinking, and the simple color wheel, I think that reality, like the way when you think of impressionist painting, where the full spectrum of color comes, that sort of visual, the pointillism and impressionism, where it reads back a sense of completeness because of all of the interconnected sort of opposites in the color. Like I think that's something that I see that operating, or I think about that when I'm choosing colors. So there's mood is on the one end of the spectrum, but really then there's these kind of theories and tools that help you navigate from one to the other as you're through a piece. So I think it's interesting that those mechanisms that are different have different drivers for color.
I think you just put your finger on something that's pretty important, probably for all of us, is that we would say, it seems like a lot of us would say, well, we respond to mood, we work intuitively, and yet that intuitive stuff is informed by a lot of experiences actually struggling with and making the work.
Yeah.
So if you want to be really honest about it, it's a little bit like a musician might start learning a phrase by counting, and they count their way through a piece of music, maybe very awkwardly, and eventually it starts becoming like a song. And at some point they're just playing from the heart, and it's really intuitive, and that's what makes it so great. On the other hand, it's probably not just intuitive, because that intuition is informed by all kinds of other experiences. And I just felt like that's, if there's any students in the room, I mean, for students, that's probably an important thing to keep in mind, because you want to bump up against these learning how colors work off each other and all that stuff. You struggle maybe with some things that almost seem a little bit outside of yourself, and yet at some point it becomes much more almost like a kind of second nature that you can work with on your own terms.
Yeah, I think for me, all this brings up this color theory, right? Color theory has its place, and I think it came to me late, because I never had a color class in any of my education, and as I said, I was all mixed up and screwed up with color personally, for whatever reason, and then eventually, I started teaching myself some of this Albers and the book, and then the other book. What is the other big book on color by Itten? Yes, thank you, Itten, which is another taking more of an intuitive approach, right, to color, and I think that doing that did open things up for me, and it's something that I kind of keep in the periphery, that I kind of understand these things, but then, I try to forget them at the same time, So it's kind of a push and pull with color, and I think it's fascinating to see artists who I feel are really colorists. I mean, they just, that is like the backbone of, what they're doing, and I don't consider myself to be a colorist in that way. And I think actually there's a lot of intuitive work that is in this gallery concerning color. Maybe Mike Charles comes closest to what, to this more of a kind of colorist attitude using color. But there's a lot of intuitive stuff happening in that work too with color, I think. It's a whole world in itself that it's fascinating.
I'm just looking around, and I know I think about this, but looking at the paintings, I know others of you guys think about this too, but the idea that groups of colors together connected or paired or contrasted with other groups of colors can talk about an area of a painting which is lit up versus an area of a painting which appears to be in shadow, even though it's an abstract painting and there's no representational imagery. The sense that, right, the colors can talk about darkness or light, or they can move forward in the painting and push back. I mean, all of those are skills I developed through observational work, and then once I started working abstractly, I found myself doing the same things, just not as connected to, not connected to a recognizable motif in the same way. And it seems, as I look around, a lot of people use color in those ways too.
That was great. It was wonderful to hear your opinions about your palette and how you approach approach how to construct a painting. I'm going to open it up to other questions if the audience feels so inclined.
No, it's okay.
Oh, sorry.
I recently had this one art history class where we were discussing about, we had a debate actually. It was about how people think that designer, I'm a designer, how people think that the designer is an artist. It's not relevant, but since you guys are here, I think this is like a good platform that I can know what do you guys think if designers and artists are equal or there's like one that is above each other.
Yeah, that's a great question. So everybody get to hear the question?
I think you can be a great designer, you can be a great artist, and I think this sense of, there's craft versus art, or a trade versus art. What happens is there's a functional element, like a designer has usually a criteria that maybe is, a client has the criteria for, solving a particular problem, and, we think of the problems that artists solve are not maybe of a practical nature, it's more in, an expressive realm versus, but I think I don't see like a high-low there. I think there's, masterful craftsmen, or masterful design, masterful craftsmen. It's really a sense of the purpose of whatever the endeavor is, in my mind.
I would agree with that. I don't see a hierarchy of somehow artists are better than everyone else or worse than everyone else, or that one form of working is somehow better than another. I just don't see that at all. Abstract painting has its things it's really good for. It probably has some limitations. Design intersects with how we live our lives in everyday ways that we're maybe not even conscious of, in terms of what happens when we enter a space architecturally, or where, there's so many funny little ways that design affects us in all kinds of ways, and it can be really passive-aggressive, or it can be very humane, and there's so many ways to bring it to it. So I think that maybe the more interesting question is that if you're going to be working in design, to just really jump ahead to the next question of, well, what is it you want to be doing in design? What kind of designer do you want to be, or how do you want the work to affect people? And you might end up coming up with some weird kind of hybrid that doesn't even exist yet, that intersects between aspects of design and aspects of so-called art. So I wouldn't worry too much about a hypothetical debate assigning who's higher than who, literature, dance, architecture, painting, everything's hard. Anything you do is going to take everything you've got and probably more. But if you're doing the work that you really see fit, that's what maybe calls the shots.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far, and I think that design, art, there's no hierarchy there for me. I think it's very important for artists to be exposed to design, and I think it's important for designers to be exposed to art, and I think that drawing across the board and observation and learning to be an observer is key to all of it. And then you just go to the place you need to go with that.
This is something we talk a lot about in my school. I teach at an art school that's pretty evenly split between designers and illustrators and fine artists. And I certainly don't see any kind of hierarchy, but I'm always so interested in the ways that the fields are very different. And it's, I find students tend to end up in places which sort of suit their natures more. I think designers and illustrators often have a client and have an obligation to be clear and direct. Painters, not so much, right? And so, if you design the signage for a train station and it's kind of unclear which direction you're supposed to go, you're going to be out of a job pretty quickly. But often paintings are about ambiguity and nuance and complication. And I think, I find that students tend to be better at being clear or at being vague in a provocative and interesting way. And as they go through school, they kind of find themselves in one of those two places.
It's like design solves problems and painting causes problems.
I would tend to agree with what everybody said.
I will add one other thing, and this will bring Bill Jensen into it. I know you mentioned Bill in the
Yeah.
question list. I studied with Bill in grad school, and I remember when I first started, when he was first looking at one of my paintings, I went, my art school was very kind of, formal, and then Bill's class was more, he's very much emotional, kind of spiritual. But so he was looking at this painting of mine, and I was like, oh, I don't know, there's a problem. There's still a problem. I'm not happy with it or something. And he just looked at me and he was like, painting's not a problem to be solved. Like, and that I think is the whole thing. I think you nailed it. Like, the design is, you have, you've been given a task to create something. There are usually a certain number of rules related to it. Whereas painting, and of course not for everybody, not for all types of painting, but is more of a sort of a search and an exploration, and they're just different. Some designers, some artists kind of meet in the middle a bit, like some artists are more designers and vice versa.
When you're going to do a painting, how much, probably need a microphone, when you're about to do a painting, do you think about it beforehand? Do you plan it out? Formally, choosing color, or do you just put paint down and let the painting space talk to you? Or I know you start out with an emotion, because that's what I hear from you. But how much planning is there in your painting when you do that? I mean, I'm primarily self-taught. I paint portraits in watercolor by commission. I have to plan my painting out, not only to please my client, but also in some respects, using colors that will fit the room that lady wants to put it in, including her clothes. So I have to plan I have to draw it like there's no tomorrow, and then plan it so the colors I put down with each wash work out right. And I'm trying like hell to understand abstract art, because I'm coming from 180 degrees from abstract art. Although the placement of where I put what I put is based on having an abstract concept within the space that I'm putting that head or body or group or whatever. And I look at the paintings here, and I'm trying to get meaning from it. I can get an emotion by looking at an abstract painting that has a lot of emotion or good color, and I sure as hell can appreciate painting them. But I'm trying to get some concept, because I would like to try abstract painting, and I just want to know your methodology in going about it, so to speak. And that's why I'm here.
Okay, anybody want to field that?
Well, for me, I start I have kind of a drawing attitude at the beginning, even though I'm working with color from the get-go. But I'm sort of just mapping out where I think I'm going to go. So it's it's probably not completely unlike what you're talking about, where you get sort of a vague sense of where you think you're going. And if in your case, it might be, where's the edge of the head, where's the ear, where's the shoulder, whatever. In abstract painting, it's different than that, but I still feel it to be almost like neural pathways through the painting. It's almost like there's this invisible circuitry that I'm sort of working to find. And then
Towards a focal point?
there isn't necessarily one focal point, but I do want things to exist in a particular kind of tension to one another. So in my case, there's maybe 2 or 3 main points of tension in a particular painting that's asymmetrical.
Okay.
So much of the work process is painting things in, also painting them back out. I put on paint, I scrape it back out. It's subtractive as well as additive. And I get rid of some of the little things that don't seem important and try to get it down to what I feel is like the underlying visual structure. And so for me, that has something to do with the way a few simple elemental shapes sort of nudge against one another.
So that's where you start and play it by ear from there?
Yes, so that after day 3, the painting might look similarly finished or similarly unfinished to how it looks 7 months later when it's really resolved. It doesn't necessarily look that different to maybe a casual observer's eye, but to me it's very different because I can't rest until the painting locks in a particular way and everything is working off of everything else in a particular way. I want everything to be necessary and nothing to be extra. So editing is a big part of it for me. And so I just wanted to say that right off the bat in response to your thing, because I know that several of the other works here have probably a real different methodology.
I think a lot of artists that I speak with say that they need a starting point, and whether it's a schematic, which is more of what you're talking about that you do, is you come up with some schematic, and you go from there, and it's very practiced, right? Or some artists that are coming from another point of view, or painting not for a client, but in their studio painting themselves, need to mess up the canvas or something. Need to put a wash on there. Or I know when I work, sometimes I use a silk screen, and I'll make a silk screen because the marks that I make on a silk screen are quite different than the marks I make with a brush with oil on pad or canvas. So I'll screen an image on, and then I have something to respond to.
So you're waiting for that painting, however, whatever stage it is, to talk to you,
Yeah.
to go further. But do you have a feeling that you're looking to convey to the observer?
I do. I usually have something in my head, and then the best way I can explain it, a quote comes to mind from George Braque that the artist Archie Rand once shared with me. Braque was asked, how do you begin a painting? And his answer was, and this is very much what I think I go through, I stand in front of the canvas, a blank canvas, with an idea in my head, and the rest of the process is the painting defending itself. That's what it is.
I think a lot of, I certainly have ideas for structures before I start my painting. For me, I think about a really well executed athletic act, like a dive, or if anyone's a skier, a great run. You need to know enough about what you're doing that you kind of there's no ambiguity, but then how successful it is, it depends entirely on the moment, on the performance of that activity. So I try to find ways to have enough structure but enough openness to allow for a performance. And for me, I work very quickly, and I make lots of paintings that nobody sees. I often start with anywhere, with no idea at all, and I'll just make like a bunch of little paintings that don't mean anything. But then, to me, the idea of paint as a medium, that it does show you something, and that slippage between what you intended to do and what it actually does, that's the most exciting thing as a painter. That's where it talks to you and says, like, no, you want to do this. And so I'll make a lot, and then I'll see in them, and for me it's often like, like that painting, there are probably 4 paintings that preceded it where I kept coming up with the idea. Sometimes I'll make the same painting 3 times until I get one that feels like it's right. For me, it's a very quick process. It's also very wasteful. I wish I could find a way to do it differently.
So it's analogous to a watercolor painter,
Yes.
putting colors down and
Kind of.
playing with the canvas or the paper
It's one then.
to see what happens.
And then saying afterwards, wow, I really liked it when that drip went over there and I accidentally put that line over there. Let me start the next time with putting a line there and turning the paper in that way. Sort of finding in your process things to start with the next time, I guess. But I think for me, the amount of work is really important.
Okay.
I don't start with any kind of plan. I just jump in. But I'm definitely a person that struggles with the blank canvas. Like I have to get something down right away. And then once something's down, like you're saying, Cecilia, then you just kind of start responding to stuff and reacting. And there's a lot of time spent just sitting and staring and waiting for the painting to kind of guide you.
Okay.
And sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. I had my daughter who was 6, maybe was home from school, so I'm like, well, I'm not missing my studio day, so I took her to the studio with me, and she, was sitting there all wrapped up, and I was sitting in my chair just staring at the canvas for a while, and because that's honestly half of what I do is just stare at them and try to figure out what the next thing is. And she was all of a sudden she said, "Mommy, what are you doing? Like, get to work." But it's the goal is to allow the painting to be what it wants to be, even if it's something. Sometimes they make me so uncomfortable, but yet they do have a will of their own, and they do.
Like where?
Well, yeah, and the goal is to have the painting kind of become its own thing. Like I feel like there's something that happens where it stops becoming paint on canvas at a certain point, and is almost like its own thing, and there's no more moves. It's really sort of solidly asserted itself.
So you're painting essentially for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're hoping that the viewer who comes in from left field can feel the emotion that's in it?
I like to think about it's like accessing the universal by painting the particular. Like the more honest I am with what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling and what I'm putting into the painting, the hope is that will strike a chord on some level with someone else. And, or that, it will trigger something. It will feel like something that they'll want to look at it and think about it. Or hate it, that's anything, just to react. The worst thing is to have somebody just kind of walk by the painting.
I've walked by a hell of a lot of paintings.
Yeah.
I could add one thing. In addition to staring at the painting, I sometimes go to sleep in my studio. I have to kind of just get to a really clear-headed state, and I think a lot of times we have our busy days and we're thinking, oh, I'll squeeze in a little time and jump into the studio, and it's like my head is so full that I actually just need to like close it all down and then come back up. And I start with usually the sort of Rorschach like drip, like you were saying, a shape, and that takes me someplace. It's sounds like the process that you're interested in is one where you become the client. You know, there isn't anybody but you
Well,
who's going to decide.
if I'm painting a portrait for myself, I feel a lot freer, because I don't want to get through a painting and the client says, you made my nose too fat, or you know, this is off, or my house cleaner doesn't like it, so can you do me something? So when I paint for myself, it's a pleasure. And I'm trying to get looser in the doing, and came here to say, well, if I can talk to some abstract artists, can they give me a clue as to how I can progress into not becoming an abstract artist, but to improve my own work. And that stands true whether it's a portrait or whether it's a landscape, because I'll do landscapes when I can't get a commission. So,
One more thought. Sure. An early teacher of mine said, take care of these cryptic things that stuck with me, take care of your affections, and it just stuck with me all my life. And I think the less I care, the more I do this entirely for myself, the more fun it is and the better my work gets. But that's like a hard thing. It's easy to say I don't care. It's easy to say I'm doing this just for myself, but I find that in all kinds of ways the world, other people's expectations or judgments or I find it very hard to stay centered in my joy all the time. But I think it's, you know, the amazing thing, I think, is that when you are there, it just sort of gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and ultimately that's the best thing about being a painter. Maybe that's why it's such a pain to be a painter, because you also get that.
I have one. I've been dying to ask you, Peter, if you could just tell us a little bit about your idea for the show and why you wanted to do it, and you know how you feel about the show. Since
Sure.
you've been the one, you were like the mastermind.
Well, I find abstract work just fascinating, and in my own work, I've bounced from figurative to abstraction, and I call them kind of seasons. And you know, somebody mentioned Philip Guston, and of course, we're all familiar with his late style of figurativization. And I wondered why he couldn't do figurative and abstraction at the same time. And of course, now today, you know, artists do that, and some artists are very, say, heightened awareness of trying not to be pigeonholed. And you know, Kira Richter, of course, you know, Forrest unto himself, and Sigmar Polka a little bit. But anyway, getting back to the show, I think I was. It grew out of a need of trying to have abstract work come into its own terms. I think a lot of people feel intimidated by non-objective work, and so it's part education and also just really trying to grade a high quality of kind of a survey of what abstract artists are working on today.
Well, I'm probably speaking for everybody, that it's just been a real super pleasure to be part of the show, and an honor to be shown with this group that you curated. Further thoughts?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It really has been a pleasure being here. And these words, reality and abstraction, for me, it was a tough title when I saw it, because I thought, I don't like to use those words, but I've been very pleased to be in this company of artists and the show.
Oh, great.
Me too.
What she said.
That's just well.
Thank you, Peter, for inviting me. It's a wonderful, wonderful show, and thank you for the audience for showing up, a wonderful audience.
I think everyone's covered it. Thank you, Peter.
I could hear it all day.
We could sing it.
So if there's any other questions, or maybe we should just wrap it up. So thanks very much, guys.
And I really love the. Hi guys. No, it's the way it takes on.
So do we need our
Well, if you're looking to do this for an credit, yes, you can either do this as an credit or the other assignment with the dates. Yeah, one or the other.
From a distance, I'm
Yeah,
almost.
one but I tell you what, if you write something about this, almost accidentally, thank you. Well, it should be, no.
Have you been to the show?
Distance.
It's a great show.
Oh, okay, but not for this one.
I know.
Yeah, right, and I didn't do that.
You're right.
But I mean,
I mean, the huge things.
and actually,
All those boxes, one after the other.
originally,
Yeah.
My wife and I have just been
for now, I don't.
missing out attention.
Okay, but thanks for coming.
Yeah, they don't choose a different
Yeah, we do. Well, thanks a lot. I'm enjoying your paintings too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's in our
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I come back.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. That was similar. Yeah. It's actually
I like working at the because I am one of those scientists up there. All the workers, there's 3 of us that are designers.
Where are you going?
From
Great. Oh, that's such a nice time.
Doing, especially when you're
Yeah.
I've had a couple of that, like, they're crazy, but once you get them up, you're like, oh, this is nice. One of my, I posted a picture of the panel on social media, one of my friends worked on the panel. Because,
What's the name?
she said in part,
No. He's like totally.
University, I think it's the University of Hartford, she recognized, she recognized her, and she's like, I know one of those.
Oh my God.
And some of her pieces are probably like,
Did you hear Benji come from? He goes, "When are you gonna be?"
It's only a painting, it's only a picture.
Oh, I know. intend to touch me? Yeah, you guys got all worried. Oh, you ready to go, I guess?
This conversation is over.
Oh, wow. All right, let me get Benji's sweatshirts. You guys get all your images and stuff? Who's in your hair?
You're showing New Jersey.
Do you want to get a coffee or something?
I'm not in any hurry.
I mean,
What, do you have a train or you have a?
I have scheduled for the train, so we
Let us know when you're going to be in town. Go see some shows together. Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
the work that, this is the first painting. Oh, body of work.
My husband's family.
That's great.
Like the mother people.
It's like 5 days after
I start, I'm like, no, and like, shut up. They say no to everything, and you're doing it, so it's so great. I just figure it's like, be immersed. Yeah. Do you have a lot of like just things to disconnect in life? Well, yeah, and it's so it's been hard.
Yeah.
Just
Wedding game. Yeah, yeah. It was a small group, but I think they were very into it. They were very, inquisitive, so that's
nightmare. I was not like, no, I'm something like this. Don't worry about stuff. Seriously, there's a story there. You stuff that you don't need. That's no big deal. And you'll probably end up using it. I know. That's the other thing. Painter friends will like just take other stuff. Yeah. That you want to play with. Yeah. I know. I feel like for all of us, it's been. It's like even coming today, I'm like, oh, it seems so weird. We just go like, maybe we go to like. Thanks for coming.
I also like the
Well, it's nice just to call. I told you that on the.
Well, we talked about that.
I meant to.
I'm ordering extra light.
I feel like hands on. Because I was going to read those times this way, and I was like, so I
The other side is better than, but
I didn't
I
really
like the
do
dichotomy
anything.
of that point of view.
You take a photo from right here, you know, the side.
It's great.
And how's your work going? Is it a little bit on hold until you get to? Yeah. It's been really strange because I switched over.
Yeah, and that's been hard to just get into anyway, but to do a bunch at once is really hard. I was like thinking of you, like when you were saying the waste.
Oh my God. I think about paper versus canvas. You could just power through, but then, I mean, unlike the canvas, it's like I'm having trouble like getting
Like doing the rendering of
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
That's why I like to work.